Our top story at this hour, India's growth story continues to defy global headwinds. And this time, even the US tariffs haven't slowed the momentum. Official data released yesterday showed India's GDP surged to 8.2% in July to September quarter, which is the second quarter of the financial year, the strongest in 6 quarters and well above the market expectations. Now, this despite, of course, US President Donald Trump's decision to hike tariffs on key Indian exports to 50% in late August. The sharp rise was powered by manufacturing, construction and a robust services sector, which grew over 10% in financial as well as real estate services as well, which grew over 10%. Private consumption also remained strong at 7.9%, showing domestic demand is still India's biggest economic engine. Prime Minister Modi has called the numbers very encouraging and credited pro-growth reforms and the determination of the Indian businesses and consumers. Economists say that the impact of tariffs may become clearer in the next quarter, but for now, India has once again reinforced its position as the world's fastest growing major economy, entering 2026 with undeniable economic confidence. India's message to the world is clear. This growth story isn't slowing down anytime soon. And joining me on the show is Dr. Jayant Dasgupta, former Indian ambassador to WTO. Also with us is Mithali Nikore, founder and chief economist, Nikore Associates. Mithali, coming to you. Thank you very much for taking time out. How do you read these numbers defying every possible estimates out there?
So I think, Shweta, it's really a day for all economists like myself to rejoice because it's almost like all our predictions are coming true. And, some of the numbers that are really outstanding, I would say the manufacturing sector is the real growth story of, this quarter, because we can see that the manufacturing growth has actually increased from 2.2% in the previous quarter to 9.1% in this quarter. This is nothing short of a miracle rebound. And I would like to say that, I'm sticking my neck out and saying this. It has a lot to do with the global trade sentiment because I do feel a lot of global companies that want to service the Indian market are looking at coming and taking, the benefit of the production-linked incentive scheme, manufacturing in India, servicing the domestic economy, and also servicing regional economies from India because India is actually making it easier for companies to trade, for countries to trade with each other, for regional value chains to develop. And what we are seeing in the rest of the world is that, it's becoming harder and harder to trade. So I think India is now very clearly one of the beneficiaries of this trend of onshoring.
Yeah, clearly a beneficiary there. And would it also be fair to say that India has defied US tariffs? Let's understand that from Dr. Jayant Dasgupta. Dr. Dasgupta, as India prepares to mitigate what could come by the way of US tariffs and its impact on Indian economy in Q3 as opposed to Q2 so much, do you believe at this point from the numbers which are extremely encouraging and defying all expectations, as Mithali was pointing out, that India's growth story has defied tariffs?
Well, as far as tariffs are concerned, it was only the US which had imposed very high tariffs. The rest of the world had continued with the tariffs of the pre-Trump level. So those, I think, exports had not been affected at all. As far as the US is concerned, there was a lot of front loading of the imports into the US because they were apprehending, the importers were apprehending that tariffs would get imposed, sooner or later. So the Q1 results have shown that those, front loading. In fact, the WTO has also shown that imports, global trade in that quarter has been very consistent, very robust. But since then, that is July, September, it has shown, I think, a declining trend, but it is still in the positive zone. So in the case of India, the tariffs were imposed on the 7th of August and 27th of August. After that, I think the effect would show up. So this quarter, 8.2%, this is very good, very encouraging. But in the third quarter, we may see, because of the decline in our exports to the US, some tempering of this growth.
Right.
And economists have said that overall, we may see something like 7.5% for the entire year.
All right, Mithali, apart from, of course, exports which haven't really gone down because Indian exporters have really front-loaded all of their exports, knowing and anticipating that US tariffs will hit come August of this year. I want to understand from you, which are the key sectors that you're seeing the most growth in? You mentioned manufacturing. Services has also done very well. And private consumption, which accounts for about 57% of India's GDP, is also showing healthy signs.
No, absolutely, Shweta, and completely agree with Jan. So, if we just look at the export numbers for a second, it's actually quite an interesting story. So, in the first quarter of this year, we saw that our exports grew by 8.3%. In the second quarter, our exports grew despite US tariffs. And I'm talking about the July to September quarter. The year on year growth was still 3%. So the fact is that even with the onset and the application of the US tariffs, our exports did not decline. They did not grow, say, as fast as the first quarter. But in the second quarter, also, our exports have shown growth. And that in itself is a story of the resilience of the Indian economy in the face of the global, crisis around value chains, and the fact that our exporters have been able to diversify, have been able to find other markets, and have been able to ensure that trade continues. So I would like to say that, that's the most important takeaway for me, from this data. In terms of the sectors, definitely I agree. Manufacturing is one of the most strong sectors. I do think that there's a huge amount of focus on electronics. Now there's also a new semiconductor mission that has come in, and a lot of interest is coming. I recently came from Singapore, and I'm seeing a lot of interest, from the East Asian economies to invest in India and look at joint semiconductor production and trade opportunities, which is coming in. We're also seeing a lot of interest when it comes to the services sector. Of course, hospitality is rebounding like anything, but we also find the financial services sector doing very well. The retail sector has done really well. And if you see on the back of we'll see the numbers coming in Q3, when we see the GST budget numbers also come into private finance, final
I
consumption,
was
which
about to
haven't yet
come to
come in.
that. I don't know if we have Dr. Jayan Das Gupta back with us, but while we try and get him back, the idea that US tariffs kicked in only by August and therefore are likely to have an impact on exports could also be offset by the fact that GST rationalization also happened around 22nd of September. So those numbers, by the way of increased spending, could also mean that Q3 is also looking great for us.
Yes, I think we can expect a very strong Q3 from a consumption point of view. Definitely in Q3, I believe that the numbers around manufacturing might slow down a bit, because we've seen that manufacturing always has a cyclical impact. So we've seen the first quarter was a bit slow, second quarter has been very strong, third quarter might be a bit slower, but that will be offset with the consumption expenditure.
There is, of course, light at the end of the tunnel as far as consumption is concerned. But let me also quickly get in Dr. Jayan Das Gupta back. Dr. Das Gupta, assuming that India and US are able to strike a trade deal by end of perhaps, we are already nearing end of November, by early December, and that is when I'm being very optimistic. Do you see Q3 numbers also coming in favor of India, as Mithali pointed out, because GST rationalization also kicked in by end of the second quarter, about 22nd of September. So those numbers are clearly in favor of India's GDP. And let's say if a trade deal is arrived at sooner rather than later, we're looking at a bumper third quarter growth as well.
Well, if you look at our exports to the US, they don't form a very significant part of the GDP in any case.
Right.
The exports are about 18 to 20% of our total exports in goods to the US. So, and exports overall, if you look at it, $450 billion out of a GDP of about $3,900 billion. So it's not going to be very much whether the US exports, go up or remain stagnant or go down a little bit. So that is the first point. The second point is that consumption is showing a very robust increase, steady increase. So that is something which is to the positive, and that will contribute to the overall GDP growth. Because, as you said, 57%, 58% of our GDP is consumption led, and if there is a good consumption figure, the GDP will show that. The other point is that GST rationalization is kicking in, and it will show good results in terms of consumer behavior, in terms of consumption. Also, it will add to consumption. The last point is that uh, the tertiary sector has done very well, including, I think, real estate, then professional services and financial services. So that has contributed very significantly to this GDP figure of 8.2% growth. And that is going to continue. So, and if real estate growth continues, housing finance will increase, and that will give another fillip to overall consumption. The loan will, books of, banks will go up. So it will give a fillip to the economy as a whole.
Absolutely.
So third quarter figures should be good, but I don't know whether they would be able to match 8.2%.
All right, absolutely. I mean, last time around, when first quarter numbers came in, we thought Q2 is definitely not beating Q1. That's happened. So I would say never. But let's talk about tertiary sector for now. Tertiary sector, which includes, financial, real estate, as well as professional services, grew double digit, Mithali. So what's really happening here?
So what we're seeing, I think, Shweta, is literally rebound of that growth which had been held back for the last 2 to 3 quarters, especially in financial services. We are seeing a global sort of reshuffling when it comes to the financial services industry. We're seeing that the financial services industry is diversifying its bases. We're seeing the GCC sector doing extremely well. When we look at the rate at which global capability centers are opening in India, it's almost like one a day in cities like Bangalore, which are attracting this investment. And it's not only Bangalore, but a number of clusters for GCCs emerging across India, even in cities like Bhubaneswar, in cities like Ahmedabad. And what we are seeing in India today, when we look at the services economy, is really the tier two cities starting to become extremely, fast growers when it comes to the logistics services, when it comes to real estate services, when it comes to financial services. So it's, and of course, our most important, which is the IT services sector. I've been also speaking to a number of people in the IT services industry, and the way the IT services industry is, adapting to AI services and AI transformation is really commendable. I was actually personally very worried whether our industry would be able to weather the shock of AI, but it's actually adapted very, very well, and they have created products and tech products around AI and are helping their current clients with, moving towards AI based solutions. So, honestly, I do think that all of this is starting to reflect in the services sector growth.
All right, so 7.8% in Q1 and over 8% in Q2, bringing the total to about 8% as far as the first half of financial year 26 is concerned. Dr. Das Gupta, are we looking at perhaps a post-Trump world where services will drive India's growth story as opposed to goods and merchandise exports?
Yes, there are indications that in about 4 years or maybe 5 years at the most, our services exports will actually overhaul or pass the goods exports figure. The goods exports are around between 440 and 450 billion dollars. Services exports are around 380 billion dollars or so, but they have been showing a very consistent growth rate of about 8-9%, between 8 and 10%, depending on the quarter. So, in 4-5 years' time, if our goods exports doesn't pick up, our manufacturing doesn't pick up, then I think there are all the possibilities that services will actually overhaul goods exports, and we will become a more services-oriented exporter.
That's right.
So
And
that is,
clearly
yeah.
working in India's favor. That is, given that that is where India's prowess also lies. But we'll have to leave it at that. Dr. Jain Das Gupta, Mithali Nikore, thank you very much for joining us and for decoding what those numbers really mean. 8.2% in Q2, defying all expectations. That's the number at which India's GDP grew. And adding up first quarter, second quarter, bringing the total to 8% in the first half of this financial year. Looking very good and very bright there for India's economy.